also hope that Democratic control of the House and Senate will raise the odds of prompt action on increasing the minimum wage. I've long said that we need to reward work, not just wealth in this country. People in both parties now recognize it's time to raise the minimum wage so hardworking people earn at least $15 an hour minimum. No one should work as millions are doing today, 40 hours a week at a job, and still live below the poverty line. They're entitled to at least a $15 minimum wage.
Welcome to the G2 podcast. My name is Shanna Forta, VP of Operations at the Gold Institute for International Strategy in Washington, D.C. And here I'm here today with my co-host, Ellie Gold, founder and chairman of the Gold Institute. Good morning, Ellie.
Good morning. Hi, how are you, Shanna?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Today we're going to be talking about a very controversial issue, the minimum wage. I know it's a very hot button issue right now that talks about raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour. Today we're going to be interviewing Congressman Keith Rothfus, former member of Congress from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who sat on the Financial Services Committee from 2013 until 2018. But before we do that, I just wanted to go through an article that I saw in Forbes magazine about the unintended consequences of raising the minimum wage to $15. A recent study by the Congressional Budget Office entitled "The Effects of Unemployment and Family Income of Increasing the Federal Minimum Wage" was conducted to determine how increasing the federal minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour by 2025 would affect employment and family income. The conclusion was that increasing the federal minimum wage would have two major impacts on low-wage workers. Earnings would increase for many, which would lift some families out of poverty. However, other low-wage workers would become jobless. Their family income would drop and it would place them below the poverty threshold. So if we look at an example of a typical restaurant that employs workers at $15 an hour, the unintended consequences of the minimum wage increase, if the employees work 8 hours a day each week, the labor cost will be approximately $436,000, according to this article, which with margins being so narrow would be absolutely impossible for a restaurant owner to cover. Another reason against minimum wage would be that employers may elect to cut hours across the board for everyone, according to Forbes. Whichever way the employee goes, some of the workers will be in a worse situation. Seattle's move to $15 an hour, which was the same as Washington, D.C. I think New York and San Francisco also have current $15 an hour wage a few years ago, resulted in workers given fewer hours and experiencing a net loss in pay. So before we get started with Congressman Ellie, I just want to come to you for a minute. Why is this so important to the Gold Institute? Why does it matter to us as a national security foreign policy think tank?
Well, thank you, Shanna. You know, when we look at issues relating to national security, you know, one typically thinks about starting a war. Let's talk about China's military buildup or Russian missiles and the extension of the START treaty. But in reality, when you focus on national security, we have to deal with numerous different aspects of how we interact with countries and how the conflict with countries look. So if we take a look at China, for example, and our current battle with China, anything that is going to severely negatively impact our economy it only helps our adversaries and hurts us. You know, we're currently in a crisis period, I would say, I would go as far to say that as a result of COVID, the economy is slowly but surely rebounding, but the potential for severe inflation is really going to, it has the potential to hurt Americans as well. If we add upon that the potentially negative impact of increasing our minimum wage, the federal minimum wage. We're not talking about the state and local minimum wage, but if we're talking about the federal minimum wage and we're increasing that, it's going to be, as you quoted from the Forbes article, it's going to hurt many Americans, especially as we see after President Biden's executive orders eliminating jobs relating to energy and in particular the Keystone Pipeline. The impact that a federal minimum wage increase would have on our national security could very well be significant.
Okay. So now, Congressman Keith Rothfus, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
I wanted to ask you, the minimum wage was initially part of the 1.9 COVID relief package. Can you tell us where that stands right now?
Well, they're negotiating right now, and whether it ends up in the final package, they've decided to go forward with this $1.9 trillion package under a reconciliation rule, which would bypass the filibuster opportunity for Republicans in the Senate. They only need 51 votes to pass this. There's something in the Senate called the Byrd Rule, which the parliamentarian in the Senate has to take a look at different provisions of a bill that comes through on reconciliation and determines if it truly is related to the budget. There are negotiations going on within the Senate right now, looking at that issue. But again, they're trying to ram everything through that they can in light of the election. Again, this is a very divided country. It's a 50-50 country. Biden comes in pretending that he wanted to govern on some unity principles, but it's been very divisive from January 20th on with all the executive orders. And here again, they're trying to ram this thing through. A number of Republicans went to try to negotiate. I think 10 Republicans in the Senate trying to negotiate with Chuck Schumer and President Biden over at the White House. But they decided to go 51-50, having Kamala Harris help to ram this structure through. So we'll see if the minimum wage increase can withstand the Byrd Rule analysis. But there are serious issues to take a look at. As you mentioned, there are a lot of cities that already have a higher minimum wage. This is reflective of the principle of federalism. You can let the states try different things. Florida, just for example, decided to raise its minimum wage by 2026 to $15 an hour, staggering in over a number of years. We have pockets of the country where $15 an hour simply isn't going to be enough to have a family wage to begin with. You do see the economies in local areas responding to wage pressures. There are some areas where the minimum wage, it may say $7.25 federally, but the de facto minimum wage is higher because there is a competition for labor. And so you've seen companies offer more. Walmart has offered a higher minimum wage. Target has offered a higher minimum wage than the $7.25 federal an hour. And so when you're talking about a one size fits all coming from Washington, D.C., it's going to be $15 for everybody. Well, that ignores pressure points, particularly for small businesses, which have been devastated by this pandemic. But here we go again. We saw this in the Obama administration, regulation, rule, tax increases coming out of Washington, D.C. that had a detrimental effect on the economy. We had the slowest economic growth in a recovery since World War II under the Obama years. And now it's back to the future. I remember talking with then Chair Janet Yellen from the Federal Reserve while I was on the Financial Services Committee. And she was exasperated by the slow economic growth rates that we were seeing under the Obama years because it wasn't working out the way they thought. And I suggested that maybe that's because these economic headwinds that she was talking about were anthropogenic or man-made. It was the overslaught of regulation and high taxes coming out during the Obama years. And what did we see? We saw income stagnation in the Obama years. When President Trump came in with a Republican Congress, when we cut taxes, when we stopped the regulatory onslaught that was impacting business and small business and opportunity, what did we see? We saw real income growth for the first time in a very long time across the board. This is what we need to be doing. We need to be looking at getting Washington off the back of small business and letting this economy flourish, particularly coming out of this pandemic. You look at places like New York City or any central business district, it's just been devastated. The restaurant industry, the hospitality industry. Look, we need to get these companies back on their feet, and you don't do that by immediately giving them another cost that they're going to have to withstand.
Well, 2 points. First of all, it's incredible to me that they're bringing up this minimum wage question during COVID, where all the small businesses are the ones that are suffering the most. So that's really incredible. And the second question is, who does the minimum wage really help? If you think about it, the people that's going to kill the small businesses, the people that's going to help are the big businesses like Target, Amazon. They can afford to pay these wage increases. So really, we have to really delve deeper and say, who is this really helping?
Well, it begs another question too, though, because if, for example, if you have an $11 or $12 minimum wage at Walmart and we go up to a $15 minimum wage federal, are they going to have their effective minimum wage then be $19 an hour? Because that will push the pay scale up for everybody. And that's where you have companies that are going to have to really take a hard look at their bottom line. And if they can afford it, great. If they can't, they may end up going out of business, or they may end up automating. We're seeing that in the restaurant, the fast food industry, certainly with the kiosks. It's not too far in the future when you're going to have a robot that can be cooking pizzas, cooking hamburgers, and those jobs will be automated, because once you continue to increase the cost of labor, small business or other business are going to find ways around that. And as Ellie mentioned in his intro, look, this is a global economy. You have wage pressures from other countries. We are competing. Look, if we have a good business out there that's going to thrive, those wages at that businesses are going to go up. And we've seen that across the country in pockets where there has been prosperity, and those wages are lifting naturally. But to come in and say, okay, we're just going to across the board, who does that benefit? It's not going to benefit the person who wants that entry-level position, that student who wants to make some extra money, perhaps a retired person who wants to get out and make a little bit of money to help support whatever project they want to be doing. You look at this ladder of economic opportunity we're supposed to have in the country, and it's stepped. There are rungs in a ladder. And by raising the minimum wage to $15 across the board, regardless of the economic situation of a particular community, you will be sawing off those bottom rungs of the ladder. And it'll get to the point where some people won't even be able to reach the new bottom rung because the costs of entry are going to be so high.
I had the opportunity to a couple years ago to sit with visit the district with one of your colleagues in the House, and it really was eye opening. If somebody is as boring as I am and it keeps C-SPAN on to watch the 1 or 5 minute speeches on the House floor. So you listen to members of Congress who say, I just spoke to Joe in my district, and you sit there and you go, do they really speak to Joe? I mean, anybody could be Joe. And I had the opportunity to visit a district with a member of Congress. And by the way, kudos to you guys for waking up for starting out at 8 o'clock in the morning and coming home at 9 o'clock at night after going from business owner to business to business to school to business. And you really get the opportunity to see what, what it's like, what the for lack of better terms, what that common man or woman is going through, that Joe business owner is dealing with. And the question I have is let us assume for a moment that we pass this $15 minimum wage, what are the second and third order effects to the economy as you would see it from your district? In the sense that now Joe business owner who may not be able to afford it will either automate or close down, right? So does this ultimately have a larger negative impact than just unemployment? Or in other words, are we now going to be raising taxes to pay for more social programs, which will ultimately bring on a regression than progress?
I think the biggest impact is going to be for some people not being able to get that first entry level opportunity, whether it's the student looking to make a little bit of money, whether it's the unskilled laborer who wants to demonstrate his or her abilities and skill set and those soft skills that we talked about, where people can get to work on time, punch in, and begin their day and provide a service with a smile. If we go across the board, look, employers are either going to try to pass along their increased cost to their customers, which will make the individual who gets who gets an increase in their wages is going to have to pay more for other services. So great, they get a raise, but then they go out to buy something, and it's not going to be the price that it was, or perhaps the seller is going to look for a cheaper source for that, and it's not going to be from America, and so that there are going to be American jobs lost as a result of that. So those are the kind of secondary impacts that you're going to be seeing. Also, again, automation. If you have a small business that has 10 employees and one of the employees finds another opportunity, are they going to replace that? Are they going to leave it at 9 and find a way to automate or increase the productivity of the 9 who remain behind? And this is but one cost that small businesses are facing. You know that this administration is looking at ways to raise taxes on business owners. You've heard talk from the likes of Elizabeth Warren about a wealth tax. Again, putting the squeeze on those who are providing business opportunities for other people. And so this is one factor, and you pile these things up: regulations, taxes, higher costs that they're supposed to incur through minimum wage or whatever. You're going to have a slowing effect on the economy.
Shauna had a good point before, and she had, when she made the comment that this will disproportionately impact small business. I just was recently on a call with banking executives recently, and as they were describing it, when we look at the progression of the economy moving forward, the way they had described it is, at this present moment, there is a lot of, to use their term, cash sloshing around, and there is, and especially as there are further stimulus and further checks going out from the government as well, there's going to be a lot of cash going around, and quite frankly, there are more stimulus checks than going out than negatively impacted population. So therefore, ultimately, there's a lot of money going around, which could very well lead to an inflationary situation, because there's more money and less product, and there are less goods out because of COVID. We're not producing as much. They also had indicated that you're now going to begin seeing a greater mergers and acquisitions now, because of all of this money, companies are able to consolidate. So which may very well, through these mergers, through these M&As, you're going to see less competition, a more consolidated economy. The question I have is, and this is something that I try to ask every member and every policymaker that I meet, because it's so important for people who are watching this to really understand this. You know, just like I said to you before, when I'm watching C-SPAN and I'm questioning, you know, is there really a Joe businessman that Congressman Rothfuss talked about in his 1 minute? Describe for us what happens. In other words, someone woke up one morning and said, you know, we need a $15 minimum wage. And this has been going on for a number of years, even before Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her cohorts came into Congress. When you come into the committee room to debate these things and to discuss it, what is going on? What are you talking about? How does that debate look? So that way people can understand, is this just, oh, Nancy Pelosi is just pushing this through because she wants to? Or what is the process with which this happens?
Well, the process is broken right now. So, for example, there will be some minimal debate about this, that there will be no opportunities for any effective amendments where you could try to have accommodation for perhaps areas of the country that are not economically thriving. Why is that? Because everything has been shut down in the legislative process that we see. And this is not just of recent vintage. This has been trending for years, where packages are put together in the Speaker's office, whether it's Republican or Democrat. They decide what they want to go to the floor. Very little opportunity for amendment. Amendments have virtually been shut down with this new Congress, with the margins so tight. The Democratic majority has taken away what had been one opportunity for the minority party to try to have influence on the bill. This is the so-called motion to recommit, where when a big piece of legislation is coming through, the minority party is given the opportunity to say, hey, how about this? Can we add this to this? You know, Republicans were very effective when we were in the majority to withstand those motions to recommit that the Democrats were offering. But last year, we saw a number of instances where Democrats actually went and voted with the Republican motion to recommit, and the Speaker didn't like that. So now they've pretty much shut down that process, which is, again, the members end up running either to Fox News or MSNBC or to Twitter, and they'll say something provocative so they can get some word out. But when it comes to actually having substantive impact on legislation, this is all getting packaged together in the leadership offices.
It's very interesting. So is this something that is able to, that you see a shift back, or is this going to be the process moving forward?
This is the process moving forward until you have a president who would be willing to hold Congress accountable and veto some pieces of legislation where the president actually has, take a little bit of humility, a president who have an interest in seeing the representative branch of government work better. We see this every year with these omnibus bills. And every year, the president threatens that this is going to be never again. I'll never do this again. And what does the president do? Signs the bill. A bill this last go around in December that cost over $2 trillion, that came out 6 hours before the vote. And that was it. 5,000 pages. There is no way a member of Congress was able to digest that in 6 hours and then vote for it without having any impact, by the way, without having any ability to amend the piece of legislation. Your representative ends up becoming a potted plant and hands the voting card over to whoever the majority party is. And that's not the way our representative republic is supposed to work. There should be iterative, going back and forth, opportunity for amendment. If you don't like the amendment, you can move to amend the amendment. But that's not the legislative process we have in Washington, D.C.
So my final question, do you think this is actually going to pass in the end?
I don't have a crystal ball on that one. I know that there are some senators who are very concerned. I've heard that Senator Manchin from West Virginia has been concerned about the impact of a $15 minimum wage on parts of his state. Would he vote against such a measure if it came? And they need every single vote. It's a 51-50 Senate right now. So I think it remains to be seen where we're going to go with this.
Let me ask a final question as well, and that is, I just want to get your sense on this. I referenced this at the beginning, so I think I just want to hear what your thought is on this. Let us assume for a moment that this passes. How do you see this impacting our battles with China and other characters that we're currently fighting with?
Again, it's one more straw on the camel's back, and what is eventually going to break it is anybody's guess. But when you put more and more responsibility on the backs of small business, something's going to give. I was speaking with one of my former constituents recently who lived through the Obama years and barely hung on. Was able to do a little bit better during the Trump years. Things had loosened up. But then looking at all these mandates now coming out with respect to climate change and the negative impact that's going to have on Pennsylvania's energy industry, he's telling me he's done. He's done. And he has a number of employees. And where are they going to go? If he's going to wrap up, folks who have done very well for 20, 30, 40 years, and they could go another round, they could go another 5, 10 years. But when government policy comes from Washington, D.C. that ends up discouraging investment and discouraging those who are trying to provide opportunities for people, it's too much for them. And so you will see an exit of a certain number of folks from the business community because they're old enough where they've done well enough and they could take an early retirement and decide to either sell their business, which would, to your earlier point, would result in some consolidation and lost jobs. Again, it's concerning to see this academic ivory tower kind of approach to government, which you're seeing now from the Biden administration. All the so-called experts who think they know how things are going to work, and then they come in and as Janet Yellen said in 2015 or 2016, she couldn't understand why we have these persistent economic headwinds. Well, they're right in front of you. It's the burdens you're putting on small business.
Understood.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Rothfuss. It's been very informative. We really appreciate it.
Great having a conversation today.
For our seasoned viewers, you'll know that Congressman Rothfuss has been on with us before about cryptocurrency. And for others, you can look it up on YouTube. For more information on the Gold Institute, you can go to www.goldiis.org. If you want to see more content from the Gold Institute, the G2 podcast, please hit that subscribe button. It will show us some great support and we'll continue the work that we're doing. Thank you so much again for joining us.